and welcome to another episode of Two Guys and a Chainsaw. I'm Todd.
And I'm Craig.
Today we're hitting another request. This is from Vincent, requesting this all the way from Norway. He asked us to do Peter Jackson's Braindead, better known stateside as Dead Alive, due to the fact that there's another horror film called Braindead, which we should probably do sometime. Dead Alive. Now, Craig, I have full disclosure here, this is one of my favorite movies. In college, I stumbled across this movie, absolutely loved it. This is my first introduction to Peter Jackson, and as soon as I saw this movie, I got it on VHS, I showed it to all my friends, I've watched it, I don't know, so many times. You know, I'm not the kind of guy who rewatches movies, generally.
Yeah.
And aside from some of those when I was a kid, you would just tend to rewatch movies. I don't usually do that. But as far as horror movies go, I think I could kind of name on one hand probably this movie, Evil Dead, Sorority House Massacre 2, maybe Army of Darkness, that I've seen more than 2 or 3 times. Mm-hmm. And I will actually think about just popping in. That is how special this movie is for me. So it's going to be very hard for me to be 100% objective about this.
That's okay.
But coming back to it, I actually hadn't seen it in years. I probably haven't seen it for a good 8 or 9 years. So I actually was a little surprised at some of the things I'd forgotten about it. But for me, it just made it even more charming. So that's my history with this movie. How about you?
I don't know. I know I've seen it before. When you said, let's do Braindead, I was like, oh, I've never seen that. You're like, and you said it was Peter Jackson. And I said, wait, it's not the one with the Sumatran rat monkey, is it? And you're like, yeah, it is.
That's the one.
It's because I only knew it as Dead Alive. I didn't know that wasn't the original title. And I don't remember when I first saw it, maybe in college or graduate school, something like that. Gosh, I don't really have... I had some memories, like I remembered some of the effects and stuff. I remembered it being super, super bloody, which it is. It's really gory. And I remembered it being funny. This time around watching it, I don't know. I'm glad that you're going to be super enthusiastic about it, because I feel bad saying this, because I feel like any good horror fan should just be like peeing their pants about this movie. Because it is so good in so many ways, and like it's innovative and creative, and it's clearly made with a lot of love. I don't know. I just don't know if I was in the wrong state of mind yesterday, and by wrong state of mind I mean sober.
Wow.
And I don't know, like, it was good. I still appreciated a lot of it. I didn't love it. But
wow.
I'm gonna pretend like I did.
No, you got to be completely honest.
I feel like I should. Like, it's one of those movies that I can watch. And I'm like, oh, you should love this. Quit being such a butthole. So I don't know. Maybe talking about it. This happens sometimes. Sometimes when I talk about something with you, I appreciate it more. So we'll see.
This is going to be good for me, because it's going to be a good counterpoint. It's going to force me to reevaluate things in a way I wouldn't have normally. So it's going to hopefully add some much needed depth to our usual shallow conversation. You know, when I first stumbled onto this movie, Peter Jackson wasn't really a household name. Mm-mm. Now he's so famous. He's known especially for taking on that incredible project of Lord of the Rings, which was very, very well received.
Yeah.
Then he went and did his dream project, King Kong, which, depending on who you talk to, it's overly long and maybe just a little too grandiose. And then he went on to do the Hobbit movies. And I'm not sure I've ever talked to anybody who didn't think that the Hobbit movies, which is a case of where he took this extremely simple and quite nice and well-regarded story and just went overboard with expanding into this complex 3-film thing. I guess he was trying to provide a nice lead up to the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Yeah.
But God, I watched the second Hobbit movie and I could barely get through it, and I didn't even bother to watch the third one. It's just insane.
Were there 3? I don't remember. I thought there were only 2, but anyway.
3.
Yeah, I agree. But the Lord of the Rings, I mean, all the attention it gets, it deserves it. I mean, those were great movies. And I love Peter Jackson's King Kong. I love it. Like, I weep at the end. Oh. Like I am an emotional wreck at the end of that movie.
Well,
I love it.
He's always been kind of accused of well, lately especially, and even with King Kong, I think, was accused a little bit of preferring spectacle over almost anything else. I mean, he's got, I don't know, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. He's really good at doing this action stuff. It's just all this complex action and things. It got a little ridiculous in some of these movies. I remember in the Hobbit movie where they're like riding down the water on a barrels and people are like straddling two barrels and stuff while they're fighting, and it's like, oh, come on. It gets a little silly.
I remember that.
But it has its roots in these kind of films. In fact, once I got to know him from this movie, I went back and saw his even earlier films. And Peter Jackson is a total film geek. He's a guy after my own heart. He's the kind of guy who grew up just enamored with stop motion and with special effects and makeup effects and practical stuff. And that was kind of his entree into the films. Like his very first movie, Bad Taste, which is also very similar to this on a much smaller scale. Very low budget, but it's about aliens kind of invading this small New Zealand town. It's got a lot of gore, a lot of gross out stuff, but very inventive, really makes a lot of use of the low budget. And for its low budget, it has these goofy, but they still work, practical effects in it. And he went from that movie to make this insane. Have you heard of Meet the Feebles?
I've heard of it and I want to see it, but I haven't seen it.
It's hard to find. Now, not anymore, of course. You can find anything on the internet. But at the time that I was looking for it, it was very hard to find. I had to like order it special. I think it was like an imported VHS or something. But it is basically the Muppets on crack. It's the Muppets, but it's taken this total twist, and there's like a bunny that just has sex with tons of women. That like there's like a Kermit the Froggish type character that's strung out on heroin. It's this total dysfunctional, hilarious, and in totally bad taste Muppets. And so it's funny that he goes from these kind of movies, and I Dead Alive isn't too far from that as far as taste goes, but then he comes into these very mainstream films. He did Heavenly Creatures before he ever did.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, so he's got a range, and he's a very, very good storyteller. And he partners up with a woman named Fran Walsh, who, in a lot of these films was his co-writer and was very responsible for making the Lord of the Rings as good as they were. And the one thing I have to say about this movie, especially going back and seeing it again, is it is a very well constructed story. It's got a good plot. It starts out super interesting. It never lets up, but it builds in a very natural and interesting way, compounding these problem after problem on this character. It's never boring, and it's not super predictable either. Like, you really don't know where it's going to go. And I just think it's a great example. If I were teaching like screenwriting to students, I would hold up this screenplay as an example of a very well constructed story for the screen.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I liked it. The thing is, I say that I just wasn't super in love with it, but I don't really have anything bad to say about it. I didn't think that it had really any problems. I thought that it was very charming. The lead guy, his character's name is Lionel. He's played by Timothy Baum. Of course, I don't know any of these actors because they're New Zealand actors. And I don't know. I
who cares about them anyway,
Or I know. I didn't even look into their history. I don't know. But, he's a good-looking guy, but still kind of like a guy next door kind of guy. And But, he finds himself in these, terrible situations, and you root for him, like, because he is such a nice guy. And the plot is, like you said, it's not incredibly complex or anything, but it does stay interesting, and it builds. And I was always interested in what was going to come next, and how he was going to deal with these things that were coming up. Yeah, I agree with you. It's well written. It's
charming and endearing in this way that, well, I would say at its heart, it's the story of a man's love for his mother.
Yeah.
And that's what's so endearing about this character, is he's just this kind of pathetic but charming and easygoing kind of guy who's clearly overshadowed by his mother, who is this total witch.
Right.
Very stereotypical. Actually, every character in this movie, and part of what makes it so fun is just the cartoonish nature of it. And that really goes back to the characters. Like every single one of them, even though they're this sort of stereotype, they still feel very human and real, don't they? I feel like that. I mean, the mother maybe not, and some of the like the priest and all that. Of course, they're very cartoonish. But this guy,
and the uncle,
but still, like it's not distracting. You know, it doesn't. It just feels fun and not not like poor writing or poor acting or anything like that. The very first scene it kind of introduces the Sumatran rat monkey.
Yeah, I love that. Which we don't find out until later, but like. Somebody says,
God.
They say that like the rats from the slave ships like got off the boat and raped the tree monkeys, and then it made the Sumatran rat monkeys. And you see this thing, and what is it? Is it stop motion? I mean, you only see it for a little while, but it's stop motion. It's so ugly, but it's hilarious.
Yeah, it's hilariously ugly. It's stop motion that somebody did in a basement somewhere, but you know, it's still kind of cute and it's disgusting.
It looks like a rat monkey. Like,
absolutely not like anything that somebody would want to bring back to a zoo. Let's put it that way.
Right.
But that's exactly what this is. We're on Skull Island, I think.
Yeah, because that's King Kong's island.
Yeah, exactly. It's cool. He had this, you know, clearly he loved King Kong so much. He had this throwback. Little would he know he'd go on to direct King Kong.
Right.
So cool.
They could have called King Kong like Rat Monkey 2. Curse of the Kong or something.
I think it would have had a much narrower audience if he'd done
Probably.
that. Anyway, there's this guy, I guess he's a zoologist, and he has this permit that he can come in from the New Zealand government and take a specimen back, and he's got this rat monkey in a cage. We don't really see it because the cage is very enclosed, but they're running from natives. It's all quite stereotypical, also this is set back in the past. And that was one thing I forgot about this movie is it takes place like in the 50s.
Is it the 50s? I couldn't remember. I wrote it down.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. 1957.
Mm-hmm. And so, you know, the natives are chasing him, blah, 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 and they're escaping, and they get in the truck, and he's got his local tour guide with him, and they take off. But in the midst of all of this drama, he ends up getting bit through the cage by this rat monkey. And as soon as his guides see that he's bit by this monkey, suddenly they screech to a halt. They kick him out of the truck, and they point at his arm, and he goes, "You have the bite."
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, what? And they hack off his hand, and then they're like, "Oh, there's over there." And they see a scratch on his arm, and they cut off his other arm, and then they look at his head, and they see there's a scratch on his head, and they cut off his head, and then we get the credits. So clearly there's something wrong with the getting a bite from the Sumatran rat monkey. But it doesn't stop those guys from making sure that thing makes it back to New Zealand and getting their money out of it before they go. So this ends up in the zoo. That's the opening to the movie. Meanwhile, we go to this guy. Actually, it starts out really more focused on this woman. She's like a Spanish gal, very young, cute, runs a little shop. She's enamored by this guy who comes by and gives deliveries to them. And her older, like grandmother type character pulls her in the back and says, "Let me read your fortune." And she's going to read this fortune because she noticed that her granddaughter or whatever, maybe daughter, I don't know, likes this guy.
"There will be one romance, and it shall last forever, and you will become romantically entangled with him almost immediately.
But who is it?
You will recognize this man is you by the symbol of the star and of the moon."
And she lays a couple cards down, and the girl goes, "Well, what's this card?" And it's like the Doom card or something like that. And she's like, "Oh, no, that's nothing. And she just starts to put her cards away. So she thinks it's about this guy. But pretty soon, the main character, Lionel, comes into the shop, and he's this total buffoon. Like, he's bumping into things and knocking fruit down and everything like that. And she's just a little put off by him until some of the things that he knocks over turn out in that shape of the star and the crescent. It's like two pencils and like a piece of licorice or something. And as soon as she sees this, like, her whole attitude towards him completely changes. And now she's like, I've got to get with this guy. And he's like, probably never been approached by a woman before. And so he just sort of backs out of the shop. And so the next part of this movie is her just constantly imposing herself upon this guy who really just would rather take care of his mother. And it's not like he wouldn't want to be with her, but it seems like his mother is just a full-time project and he has no time in his life for anything else.
Well, it's funny because that's one of the things that makes him so endearing. The first guy, the sexy delivery guy or whatever, like, he's this hunky guy and she's taken with him, and then she's not taken with Lionel at first, but then eventually she is. But he's just awkward. I think he's a really handsome guy. Like,
he is, yeah.
I think that the only reason that he hasn't had girlfriends or whatever is because he's so put upon by his mother. Not only because he feels, I guess, it's his mom, so he wants to take care of her, but she totally exploits that too, and she's incredibly controlling. When she even finds out that there's a girl interested in him, doesn't she, like, forbid him to see her?
Something like that. What, she calls her a sweaty, greasy
shop girl.
Yeah, and like, I forbid you to see her, that kind of thing, yeah.
You feel bad for him. It felt like there were definite Norman Bates type, he's not a crazy psychopath, but you feel like give it a couple years and
right.
Maybe he could be, because that's what it seems like. It's that kind of mother-son relationship where she's just incredibly controlling. And the actress that plays her, Elizabeth Moody, she's, again, I don't recall ever having seen her in anything, but she's got kind of a Betty Davis vibe. Like, she doesn't look like Betty Davis, but she's just kind of got that kind of husky voice. And
there's a beetle.
Hey?
There, under the fridge. Horrid little creature scuttled right in front of me. I thought I told you to spray this house.
And she guilts him all the time, like, that he's not good enough to her and he's not taking care of her, when really he's bending over backwards to satisfy her every whim. But yeah, that's what I mean, and that's what it becomes. Paquita really, really is putting the moves on him, and he's interested, but the mom is got a close eye on it, and she's doesn't like it. But Paquita somehow convinces Lionel to take her to the zoo. Like, he just mentions the zoo, and she's like, yeah, I'd love to go. Thanks for inviting me. Like, not exactly in those words, but like, she totally invites herself.
Yeah.
And so they go off to the zoo, and they have a funny little, like, it's so many parts of it, especially here in the beginning, are played so light.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, oh, here's a fun little zoo day. And funny, music in the background. It feels kind of very 50s romance. And they go around the zoo and they see all the animals and it's all very cute. And then they see the monkey house. And they're watching these cute monkeys when all of a sudden this horrible claw arm reaches out and grabs the arm of one of the monkeys and rips it off and eats it. And it's the Sumatran rat monkey. Like, why would they even put it anywhere where it could reach any other animal? It's horrible.
Why would you even have it in the zoo? It's not even pleasant to look at. There's no...
Oh God, no! It's hideous.
And the mother's been following them out there because, again, she's very controlling, and she ends up against the cage and gets her arm bitten by this Sumatran rat monkey right on her wrist, and she lets out a scream, and he finds her, and they take her home.
Not before she stomps it dead.
That's right. It's such a nice touch in this movie that she herself is almost a worse character than anybody else.
Yeah.
She just stomps it dead with her heel of her thing. So the rat monkey's dead. They go back home, and this begins the mother's slow and very comical deterioration. And it's really neat because you hate this mom. So it's fun to kind of see these things happen to her. There's really very little sympathy for her character in this movie. She's super excited that she has become she's a candidate for the president of this women's organization. That is told to us earlier on. And so after he brings her home, and he goes up and he's sitting by her bed, and she just looks like hell. And he unwraps the bandage on her arm, and she has this wound that's like, it has a heartbeat of its own. It's pulsing, and it's like starting to ooze things. And he's got this little cotton ball that he's using to dab it, and it's doing absolutely nothing. And it's so funny. And then come to the door, all of a sudden, are two representatives from this league that are going to talk with her. And so it's like her big day. And he's like, we should probably tell them to go home. And she's like, no! And she throws them out of the way and goes to the mirror to start putting on her makeup for them. And the first thing she does is try to put on some eyeliner or something. I don't know what it was. And a piece of skin just like peels off her face. And she just looks in the mirror and goes,
Yeah. Oh God, it's so gross.
It's so gross, but it's so funny. And he, just being the doting son, barely skips a beat. He goes and gets like some glue and tries to paste it back on. And this is the kind of thing. This is the shtick for the movie, right? It's just him increasingly trying to control the situation as it's slowly spiraling out of control. It's very reminiscent, actually, of Evil Dead in that way, right? I mean.
Yeah.
Very reminiscent of Evil Dead, where Bruce Campbell just like gets piled upon massive problems after another and ends up covered in gore and just at his wit's end by the end of it.
Yeah.
But for this one, it's just so charming because his love for his mother never wavers, even though she becomes this huge, monster by the end of it. He still is trying to salvage the situation. He just doesn't know what else to do. So, they go down, and then they have... And the other thing I kind of like about this movie is it starts out with this truly gross-out stuff, like kind of stomach-churning, disgusting things, like this scene where they're having dinner. And it's comical. It's super comical. But this husband and wife who have come to visit are sitting across from each other at the table, and they're bickering a little bit while the son is sitting at the end of the table and the mom is at the other end of the table, and she's clearly completely gone. Like, she can't even like put stuff in her mouth. There are pieces of her falling apart, and they're all trying to be rather polite about it and act as though it's not going on.
Well, the husband is just completely oblivious.
Yeah.
Like, the wife notices these things, but the husband doesn't notice anything. The wife tries to get them out of there at some point, and the husband's like, before dessert? and so the guy brings out this custard or Lionel brings it out, and the guy's like, oh, it's been forever since I've had a good custard, and he starts eating it. He's like, it's so good. And then like the mom just like, it's just so gross. Like,
so
pus just like squirts out of her into his custard, and then he keeps eating it. Like, it almost makes me want to throw up just talking about it.
It's so disgusting.
And then the mom's ear falls off into her custard, and she eats that. And like, the wife is seeing all this. It's really gross. If you have a hard time with gore, don't watch this movie, because it really is stomach churning. I'm usually okay with gore. The older I get, the harder it is for me for some reason.
Yeah.
But it's really, really gross.
Well, the earlier stuff where the pus is oozing out and people are eating it and that kind of stuff is really, really hard to watch. And then it kind of becomes this comical gore fest that's so over-the-top cartoonish that it's just fun. I don't know. That's what I would say. It just becomes really fun. It's not quite as gross unless you're really sensitive to it.
Yeah.
My wife could never watch this movie in a million years.
Right.
That people have said this is the bloodiest movie ever made. Who knows? How do you measure that sort of thing? They said by just pure gallons of blood, the final scene in this movie used like 300 liters of fake blood alone. And I would put it up there. I'm not sure we've seen a gorier movie than this one. Have we?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I mean, the Evil Dead movies are pretty gory.
But even still,
the Evil Dead remake was pretty gory. I'm pretty sure I've read that record has been broken
by something else.
By something else, but whatever. I mean, it's tons of blood and gore throughout,
and it's purely for the sake of it. I mean, and it's bald on its face. Like, there are moments in here that are like, some of these older Chinese kung fu movies, where blood will just literally just spray like a fire hose out of someone's arm or, whatever. It just gets hilarious. It's hilariously over the top in that way. So that happens and they go, and I don't know. I mean, we don't have to go beat by beat through every single scene in this film, but basically what happens is eventually his mother gets more and more sick, and still the girl's coming over and she's trying to put the moves on him.
And the mom eats her dog, her big dog. I thought that was so funny. In like 30, like, it's, I don't know, it's like a golden retriever and something like that, and like it runs up the stairs and you hear, I don't know if you hear like the dog yelp or the mom screams or something, and they run up there and the son sees something sticking out of her mouth and he pulls out, I don't know if it was the dog's tail or its leg or what, but like the insinuation was that she ate the whole damn dog in like 30 seconds.
He pulls, it's this long scene, it's at least 10 seconds long, where he pulls this whole hairy thing out of her mouth intact, and then the girl says, "Your mother ate my dog," and he says, "Well, she didn't eat all of it," and the camera pans out and there's this huge mess on the bed of like bones and the rest of the dog. It is so funny. And actually, apparently the Spanish title of this movie is Tu madre se ha comido a mi perro, which literally translates to
Your mom ate my dog. That's
crazy,
hilarious.
Right? Yeah.
Oh, gosh.
Dude.
I guess Paquita sees the mom, or they're like, she's really sick, you need to call the nurse. So the nurse comes over and she's like, oh, it's bad, we need to call an ambulance. While the nurse is calling for an ambulance, the mom dies. Paquita's upstairs because she doesn't know the mom has died. She's packing an overnight bag for her or something. And the nurse is like, it's okay. Talking to Lionel, it's okay, everything's gonna be all right. There are lots of people that care about you. We're gonna get you through this. And then from behind, the mom wakes up, but she's like a zombie now, and somehow she cuts the woman's throat like all the way to the back of her spine. Not all the way through, but like to her spine, so that like her head like flops back but is still connected. And they use that gag for the rest of the movie. She'll right her head, but then at key points it will like fall over backwards. Like, oh, it's so funny.
Yeah, like her head is like a Pez dispenser or something.
Yeah. And then the nurse becomes a mom, too, and they both attack Lionel, and he ends up throwing them both in the basement, and then Paquita comes down, and she's like, where's your mom? And he's like, they went to the hospital. And she's like, well, I didn't even hear the ambulance. And he's, well, the nurse took her in her car. And he just tries to get rid of her, which he does. A lot of things happen.
They have a funeral for the mom. I don't remember how, but eventually he kind of decides she's dead. Oh, sort of decides she's dead, or
no, she's not dead. He goes to some weird doctor. Like, I didn't even really understand
German
this.
guy. Yeah, clearly one of these like used to be a Nazi doctor probably, and now he's in hiding. It's another joke,
right? And he's only in it for a minute, but Lionel bribes him and gets some, I guess, like heavy-duty tranquilizers, and he keeps tranquilizing his mom and the nun.
That's right.
But eventually the mom gets out, and she just walks down the street. Like, it seems like they're kind of trying to make it out that when these zombies are zombies, like, they're kind of mindless and they'll just eat anything. But then there are other times when they're like driven by something.
Yeah.
Like, the mom still is driven to keep Paquita away from Lionel.
Yeah.
So she breaks out of the house, but she just makes a beeline straight for Paquita's shop. And right before she gets there, she gets hit by a trolley and thrown through the glass window. And they think she's dead. Like, we only hear it in exposition dialogue, like the priest is talking to somebody, and they say that Lionel wanted to take her home. He kept insisting that she wasn't dead, but they insisted, and they took her to the hospital, and now they're going to bury her. But Lionel's, like, sneaking around trying to get to the body because he knows he has to keep it tranked, otherwise she's going to wake up, which eventually she does, and she attacks him, and, like, they burst into the funeral, and it looks like he's...
Well, there's this hilarious scene in the back because they're late getting Mom's body to the funeral because the funeral directors...
Oh, God, yeah.
They've got this machine that they're... And, of course, it's not the way it really is. It's this total cartoonish, like, machine that's supposed to, I guess, pump the embalming fluid into her.
Yeah.
But because of the state she's in, like, the embalming fluid is, like, squirting, like, out her nose and her eyes, and it's just
it's so gross.
Total mess everywhere. And apparently Peter Jackson is there as the assistant. That's his cameo in the movie, as the assistant to the embalmer.
I didn't notice.
They just like pop her eyes back in. I mean, it's so cartoonish.
Yeah.
And put her in her coffin. But then when she's outside waiting, meanwhile the service is starting and the coffin hasn't been pushed out yet. But the priest starts the service. And he's in the back getting ready to push the coffin out, Lionel is. And suddenly his mother bursts out of the coffin again. She's alive, and he tranquilizes her. But in the process, he's struggling with her, and they fall through basically like a stained glass door into the ceremony. And it looks like, this poor guy couldn't let his mother go, and there he is with her dead body and his arms around her. It's just... horrible joke at his at his expense, and people are saying like, well, we knew he was attached to his mom, but this is a little too far. And anyway, they end up at a funeral and they do bury the body, and at the end of the funeral, as everybody goes away, as happens in a lot of these movies, right? We've talked about this before. Somebody approaches them after the funeral, and it's a long lost uncle. It's big, kind of fat, really overbearing, skeezy guy who is basically trying to get in on the inheritance.
Right. And he's so gross. Like, he made me so uncomfortable. Like, he's hitting on Paquita at the ceremony. The actor, I mean, you got to give him credit, I suppose, for doing a good job, because he just made me squirm. Like, ugh.
Yeah.
Like, you are so disgusting.
Well, and something that Peter Jackson does with the cinematography, and you'll see it in Dead Alive, you'll see it a lot in his earlier stuff, Bad Taste has it, he really zooms in on things, right? He has a very kinetic camera movements, and he really likes to do this deal. And I guess somebody else who did this was Bob Clark.
Yeah.
Not to the extent that Peter Jackson does it. Peter Jackson does it for comic effect, clearly. But, you get this wide-angle lens on the camera, but then you zoom up into somebody's face, and... not zoom, but dolly up into somebody's face, and it distorts them a little bit, and it really gets in there. And then if they're really mugging for it, it just enhances that whole cartoonish villain type effect on this guy, as well as surprise on other people and the goofiness that's going on. I really like it in this movie. And again, whenever this guy's on screen, it seems like his face is just filling it, and you hate him because he's just even skeezier when you're right up close to him, and you got to be there. It makes you uncomfortable.
And if I remember correctly, he's always shot just kind of a little bit from below.
Yeah, that's right.
So, like, you're always kind of looking up at him a little bit, which makes him a more imposing, and I mean, it's good.
Yeah.
I mean, this, Jackson, even though this is one of his early films, he's a filmmaker. He knows what he's doing.
He really does. So then, we've got three little plots going. We've got Paquita, who is really trying to put the moves, and we've got this sort of developing romance there. We have this uncle who is trying to weasel his way into some inheritance because he was left out of the will and everything was left to the son. And then we have the son who has to deal with this while he's trying to hide and handle more and more people becoming zombies that he's throwing down into the basement.
Right. Because after this, It's only because one of my favorite lines is in this scene that I want to talk about it. But like right after the funeral, like that night, Lionel goes to dig up his mom, and then like this group of thugs just shows up. They call him a necrophiliac and start, kind of
kicking him,
smacking him around a little bit. And I saw what was coming a mile away. Like, it's totally projected, but it's still funny. Like, the main thug goes and takes a piss on the mom's grave, and of course, her hand reaches up out of the grave and grabs his dick and, like, pulls him down. It almost looks like he's humping the grave.
While blood is just spraying like a fire hose out from any direction. How many movies, by the way, have we seen where someone has taken a piss on a grave and then a hand is shot up and grabbed their dick? At least 3.
At least.
I think it's at least 3. We can put this down as a trope by now. I really do feel like that.
I think it must be like some kind of guy fear that these filmmakers keep memorializing. Like, we're all super afraid that some dead body's gonna grab our junk, but
some urban legend, don't piss on a grave at midnight.
And so that leads up to my favorite line. The priest hears what's going on, and he comes and he sees all these thugs and everything that's going on. And he jumps down off like a mausoleum and says,
"Evil is amongst us. Stay back, boy. This calls for divine intervention." I kick ass for the Lord.
And he like kung fu fights them. Oh my gosh!
Total kung fu fight.
So
it's
funny,
and it's good action too. Like, it's actually really good. He's really fighting these guys. I mean, if there was a stuntman in here doing this instead of the actor, it was very well cut, because it really looked to me like the actor was doing these roundhouse kicks and everything. Throughout all this, the other thugs are turning into zombies because they get bit by the mom, and then they bite each other, and there's all this fighting. And the fighting gets really hilarious because he'll like kick off a guy's arm, and then he'll like kick off his other arm, and he'll kick his head off. And I mean, there's just blood going everywhere. It's just insane. But by the end of it, he does this flying kick towards one dude who ends up lifting him kind of up in the air as he goes by, and he ends up impaled on one of these tombstones that has a sculpture of an angel or something pointing up, and this finger pointing straight up is going straight through his body. So the priest is dead, but then, of course, comes back to life as a zombie because he's been bit as well. So
yeah, and so now he's hosting like this household of zombies. Like, you see them sitting around the dinner table, and he's feeding them, and it's
so hilarious.
Yeah, It's really funny, and the uncle comes over to try to convince him that he should share his inheritance or whatever, and while he's talking to the uncle, you start hearing sex noises, and eventually, once he gets rid of the uncle, he goes back in and finds the priest and the nurse boning. Which is really funny. But what's even funnier is that like 3 hours later she has a zombie baby.
Like, what more could they possibly throw into this movie, right? And then it turns out there's a hell of a lot more.
The zombie baby is so funny because sometimes it's a puppet and sometimes it looks like they like a grown person like in a baby costume running around. Like, it's like he used like forced perspective or something
but not very well.
But to kind of try to make it look small, but it doesn't really. And it's just really funny. And the baby is just pure comic relief. Like, it's just laughing all the time and just hijinks, and
it's so cute. And again, what I really like about this movie is the pacing of it. And I really like the fact that, okay, so Evil Dead is just, it has its moments where it kind of comes down, but there's this, it's still kind of scary, right? It's still got this sort of impending doom feeling to it. This movie, it's like all this crazy stuff happens and there's more zombies, but then now he's got them sitting around a dinner table trying to feed them. like trying to act as if everything is normal. And the movie even takes us out of the house after a while. Like he's going to get more tranquilizers and he runs into her and, they kind of have a moment. And I mean, it's just interesting how the movie really keeps you guessing and really lets up. I mean, it lets up on the scary and the gore or whatever, and brings you back into like his hilarious sort of situation. Again, I just keep saying it, but it's just a very cartoony kind of movie, right? It's so improbable. It doesn't make any sense. It's hilarious to watch this going on, but we know. I mean, this is rooted in every Bugs Bunny cartoon we've ever seen. You know what I mean? It's very familiar territory, and it's really welcome here.
There's a scene where for no explainable reason, he decides to take the baby to the park in a pram. And he's got like barbed wire over the pram so like the baby can't get out or whatever. And it's like he's watching the other park moms to see what you're supposed to do with the baby, and he's trying to do it with this zombie baby, but the zombie baby, of course, is just bad.
Well, what's funny is we see the perspective from the baby, and it looks like he's taking these precautions. He's actually put like a barbed wire net over the pram that you can't see. It's hilarious.
It's a really, really goofy scene, and it kind of is a pause in the narrative. I read that Jackson finished under budget, like $45,000 under budget. And so he used that money to shoot this scene. Now he considers it his favorite scene of the movie. And it is ridiculous, but it's like Mr. Bean or something.
Yeah, it's total Mr. Bean. You're right. Absolutely.
And it is really funny, but you can kind of tell that it was added in last minute. It's completely unnecessary to the plot. It's just for fun. It's just for goofy sight gags.
Well, and it's in such bad taste because eventually, like, the baby, like, gets out and he grabs the baby and he's fighting with it and he's like, bashing it against the ground and, like, up against the swing set and stuff. And mothers are just looking on horrified.
Yeah.
just stuffs it in a bag and kind of backs away. It's
and
horrible.
He walks by the other moms and he's like, hyperactive. And just keeps
So anyway, all these zombies end up piling up in the basement. In the meantime, the uncle comes over and he is again vying for what he thinks he is due for his inheritance. He eventually discovers these zombie bodies and things in the basement, and he decides that he needs to call the police. And so he calls the police, or he's in the middle of doing it, and he's like, or I can just let all this go if you give me the house and the money.
Right.
And the son's like, okay, I'll give you the house and the money. So he hangs up the phone. And then about a scene later, suddenly people start piling into the house because it turns out that the uncle told some people that he now had this house, and all these people are coming over to have a big party. It's a housewarming kind of celebration in this new mansion. And so it's so funny. But again, this is what I say. It's just this perfect build because you know what's coming, right? You got this huge house full of people. It's going to become absolute mayhem here in no time. And then that's exactly what happens.
Yeah, that's the final act, is this party. Because, of course, the zombies break out and infiltrate the party. And at first, like, people don't realize that they're zombies. And then eventually it just becomes, a bloodbath. And everybody, I mean, this whole house full of, 100 or more people, the zombie infection just spreads like wildfire. It's really, like, it's totally improbable, but Lionel and Paquita and the uncle somehow manage to keep from being bitten. I really like Paquita in this whole scene because she's just kind of kicking ass and taking names like the whole time. And they're not even together. Like, Lionel's off doing his own thing. Like, he ends up, I don't remember why he ended up in the attic. I don't remember if he got chased up there.
It's just a huge Keystone Cops type thing. It's just one scene after another, and the neat thing about it is that every scene is totally different, and it's kind of like a new sight gag. Like there are people who are getting pulled apart, and there's one zombie who gets pulled apart and all his insides come out, but then all of his intestines become an entity of their own, and they even like
it's like a smiling rectum. Like
it even like farts. Like they're just all these tiny little things, and it's creeping around. And one girl who we had seen earlier in the movie is like fighting some other girl who we'd seen earlier in the movie who's a zombie, and she like throws her against a wall where there's a light bulb sticking out, and her head improbably gets impaled on this light bulb, and now it's glowing from the inside. And there's just constant, all this stuff is just happening, and it's so entertaining to watch. And it is an absolute achievement in practical effects. I mean, some of these things you see them going on and you're like, man, this was before CGI. And some of this stuff is really convincing. I mean, most of it is. It's quite good. But you're right, he ends up in the attic, and I think it's that intestine insides monster, whatever, that's attacking him up there. And as he falls through the ceiling, it's also sort of, he's wrapped up in these intestines. So he's just hanging and swinging over this crowd by these intestines.
But before that, up in the attic, he finds some remains. And like, I feel like he has like a flashback or something. He had told Paquita earlier that his dad had drowned in the sea after rescuing him, and that he had these vague memories of it or whatever. Now, this scene really confused me because at first I thought that the remains that he found were his real mom.
Yeah, that's what I thought too, that she was a fake mom.
Yeah, and that like the mother that he thought was his mother was an imposter for the money or whatever. I don't know. But that's not it. As it turns out, the dad had been a philanderer, and his mother had killed both his dad and his dad's lover. So, I guess that just further vilifies the mom. I don't know. She's nasty anyway, so I don't know why that's important. But yeah. He ends up hanging by he's actually hanging by an electrical cord.
Oh, yeah. But that thing is snaking down it. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And God, I don't remember exactly what happens.
Just a whole bunch of stuff happens. He ends up outside.
It's long. I mean, this
it's 30 minutes.
Yeah, and it's all action for that whole 30 minutes. It's fighting and effects and gore, and it goes on for a really long time. And it's still going on, and like he's like swinging from the ceiling. He sees Paquita getting attacked, and the nurse and the priest are humping again, and the uncle ends up in the basement, and he ends up getting killed by the mom, who we only see her hands at this point, but she's clearly become this giant zombie monster. And then after Lionel gets down, I don't remember how he gets down, but the next time we see him, he bursts through the door, very Bruce Campbell style, holding the lawnmower. And he's got a rope, so it's kind of like slung around his neck so that he can hold it, so that the blades are held out in front of him. And he just goes on a rampage, using this lawnmower to kill all these zombies. And it's just buckets, gallons upon gallons of blood everywhere. It's just one of the bloodiest things I've ever seen.
It is so funny, and it's cool, and it's over the top, insane. And I know that it inspired later on, like at least a video game or two. I think, I don't remember, it was probably in the late 90s or it was in the early 2000s when I think the PlayStation 3 first came out. There was a pretty notorious zombie game for that came out. It was the first time we had all these high frame rates, and we could handle a lot of things on the screen at once. And there was one of these games where you were stuck in a shopping mall and there's a zombie horde. You could get a lawnmower weapon in this game, and it was pulled straight from this movie. Just pulling this lawnmower up and just mowing through zombies. It's It's crazy. It's just like when you think this movie can't get any more extreme and over the top, they throw this insane idea of a guy just holding up a lawnmower and mowing through these zombies at you.
Yeah.
It just build after build after build. I just love it. It's just it's just smart. And he's basically taking care of everything in the place except for his mom, who emerges from the basement as this gigantic 2-story tall monster. And she's like got these giant sagging breasts. And it's a really impressive effect for this film, really.
Oh, yeah. I don't know how they did it. You know, do you was it really that large? Was it that large of a prop
I think there were pieces of it that were, but then there's a scene where, they run up the stairs and they're kind of on the balcony and she climbs up the stairs after them. And certainly that's some kind of composite where they had a miniature, some kind of matte thing going on. There's no way that they had something so big in the same frame as them, standing next to it. But it was super convincing. It was really, really good.
Obviously, this came first, but it reminded me of the end of Witching and Bitching.
Yes, that's right.
When that giant, whatever it was, that giant witch or whatever.
Yeah.
Very similar with the really big butt and the big saggy boobs. And but it looks great. And she chases them up to the roof, and she's trying to throw Paquita off the roof, and Lionel's trying to fight her, but at one point he says, "You don't scare me, Mum," and she pitches the ceiling and rips open her stomach, so he slides into her stomach
It gets very Freudian, at this point. She's re-enters her womb,
Right. And the mom is actually her face kind of looked like her human face. I mean, obviously really, really distorted, but kind of looked like her human face. But it's starting to peel away, and she's starting to look like a giant Sumatran rat monkey.
Mm-hmm.
But he bursts out of her belly and saves Paquita. What happens to the mom? Does she just kind of fall into the house?
Yeah, she just kind of falls apart because he bursts out of her. I mean, one thing we failed to mention is not super important, but he has this magical charm with him that the old woman gave him. That's that same crescent and star or whatever, and that's what he uses to stab his way out. And it must have some effect on her in a magical way, so that she just he spills out of her in just a pile of gore, and her face falls apart, and all parts of her start to fall apart. And then she's still hanging by the edge of the building, and he gets down there, and they're holding each other, and he ends up sliding down. I guess it's like an electrical line or something that's attached to the building, away from the house, and that's basically how it ends, right? Everything just kind of collapses, and all the evil is gone, and the
house burns down, right?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, it's a very, like I said, just when you'd think it can't get more over the top, they end up having this final scene on the top of a roof where people are dangling. I mean, it's so classic. I just think this movie's great. I just love every minute of it. It's so much fun to watch, and it is
fun. I think
it's
that it
never
would be
boring.
I don't know. I think that I would have had a lot more fun watching it with you or with other people. I don't want to make it sound like I'm some kind of lush or something, but a little bit of alcohol, a couple of beers, and sit around and laugh with your friends. Sitting on your couch on a Saturday afternoon, watching it on my computer. It wasn't really the greatest environment, but I definitely appreciate it for what it was, and I would definitely recommend it to anybody who likes horror.
If you've never seen this before and you're inspired by our talk to go out and watch it, you absolutely have to get the unrated version. You cannot watch the R-rated version because it is cut so much. There's at least 10, maybe 15 minutes cut out of the R-rated version, and I actually made this mistake in college where I told my friends, I got this great movie, and I ended up renting what turned out to be the R-rated version, and so much was missing that this was actually a case of where the movie almost didn't make sense. Because think about it. I mean, the movie, most of the movie is super bloody and gory. If you cut out most of that, you just get these choppy scenes that don't connect so well with each other. And it was really disappointing to watch. I ended up shutting it off, and I'm like, forget it, guys. We're not going to watch it tonight. You got to go out. You got to get the unrated version to see this in its full glory and appreciate, what we've just talked about.
As of today, it's available to watch for free on YouTube. That's where I watched it.
Oh, there you go. Well, great. All right. Well, thank you again for listening to another episode. Thank you, Vincent, for the request. If you have a request, you can reach us on our website, twoguys.red40net.com. Leave us a comment there, or just search us online. You can find our Facebook page as well. On that website, you'll find all of our back episodes. And if you liked our podcast, please share it with a friend. We love getting new listeners. Until next time, I'm Todd.
And I'm Craig.
With Two Guys and a Chainsaw.